You are listening to 95.7 FM WELT, Fort Wayne, Radioactive. The opinions and views expressed in this show are those of the hosts and guests only. They do not represent those of FreeThought Fort Wayne, WELT, or any other organization. Welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour, where we explore science, religion, culture, ethics, and community from the humanist perspective. Join us as we discuss those topics and more, free from the ideologies of religion and superstition.
Welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour. This is D, and I'm here with Christopher, V, Uriah, and Andrew, and we're going to be discussing all kinds of interesting, relevant topics in today's world. I think, V, you had an announcement to make right off the top?
Well, I was just going to mention the PFLAG meeting, more than an announcement and what happened there. And I think the other topic that we were going to discuss was Pride Fest. I didn't make it out there, but I think Chris was there, and we had some video from that, and sounds like there were some interesting encounters there that I'd love to hear about. Yeah,
me too.
Well, let me start this with the PFLAG meeting. So it took place at the UU Church, and there was two speakers, but one was kind of the dominant one, and the talk in that case focused mainly on transgender people and transgender issues and things like that.
Can you define PFLAG again for me?
Sorry about that. Yeah, PFLAG is Parents, Friends of Lesbians and Gays. And, that's an old definition, but the name kind of stuck. They've obviously included transgender people in there and all that. And it basically is like if you're a member, if you're a family member that has someone that's lesbian, gay, anything like that, or if you want to be friendly towards those people, you can basically join that organization. It's a fairly small footprint that they have in town, I guess. The guy that was the speaker, so it's a fairly small footprint organization here in town. The speaker that they had works at one of the bigger tech companies in town, and he's kind of the site lead for dealing with issues that concern, I would say alternate sexual orientation and things like that. And the guy kind of started it at his firm, and he's a very soft-spoken person. So I guess, the things that he talked about, kind of the big lesson from it is how much of a diversity there is in the transgender community. It's basically, it's not just someone who's a man, who was born a man and, feels like a woman who wants to transition to a woman and the other way around. But it's a whole continual spectrum of, those, I guess, of those kind of transitions and things like that. He went over some statistics, things like that. I don't know. Throw me some questions, guys. It's hard to
give me some more information about PFLAG in general. Like, how old are they?
I think they've been around for quite a while. I don't know that we went over that too much, but I think they've been around since like the 70s or the 80s, something like that.
When they were founded.
Okay, that makes sense.
And what do they?
Yeah, and it was.
Is their agenda more to educate, or are they involved politically, or what is their agenda?
Well, I guess their agenda is to kind of advance equality for lesbians, gays, transsexuals through basically education. They set up those kind of meetings and talk to anybody that's interested. This guy that was the speaker, as I said, he started having those meetings at his company, kind of a larger company, and he would basically invite everyone, and a few people would show up. But it got kind of the conversation going at his workplace, and he later found out about PFLAG and joined, I guess.
Is it a local group or is it?
There's local chapters, kind of like we're a chapter of the American Humanist Association, but it's a nationwide kind of group.
Interesting.
Yeah, I guess just out of their website, they say they have 400 chapters and 200,000 supporters. Crossing generations and views and all that in all 50 states, I guess. Yeah.
How often?
So one thing. Go ahead.
How often do they meet, and where do they meet?
I don't think there's like regular meetings, or at least he didn't mention any regular meetings. I think it's more by invite or whatever they organize. But I guess, some of the interesting stats that he mentioned, in terms of how many people, for example, consider themselves to be transgender. It turns out that they can be as high as like 0.6%. So it's anywhere between 0.3 to 0.6% of the population consider themselves to be transgender. But only about 20 to 30% of transgender people undergo any kind of surgery or anything like that to alter their body, which I found to be very interesting. You usually only notice the people that have had maybe some kind of surgery or something like that, but most people don't. I found that to be fairly interesting, and it's hard. I guess I was reading a little bit on statistics. It's very hard to get accurate numbers on how many people are in fact transgender or something like that, because a transgender person could just identify as a male or female, so they may check that box, on a survey or something like that. And I actually found something very interesting that even the speaker hadn't heard of before. One of the people that showed up, during there was Q&A throughout the whole presentation, but they came out as quote unquote a gender. So, they try to clarify that a little bit, and basically that's a person that kind of disposes with any kind of notion of gender. So basically they consider themselves just people, not men, not women, not transgender, but just people. And you can tell that particular person was probably born a male, but was dressed more as a woman, what I would say. It was kind of neutral clothes, so you couldn't really tell, but the hairstyle, the clothes a little bit gave it away. So I thought that was interesting. And they had mentioned that, they had just recently, about a week or two ago, had a conversation with a relative and came out for the first time, and wasn't necessarily an easy conversation. It usually never is. But, one of the other statistics that I read somewhere was, how many people consider themselves to be gay in the U.S. And that could be somewhere between 3 and 4%. And what's really striking is, I guess, during some surveys, when people were asked to estimate how many people they think are gay or lesbian, they would, the mean answer was like over 20%, as high as like 24, 25% was people's guess that, that's the percentage of population that's gay or lesbian, which I found to be shocking. I don't understand why anybody would think that percentage is that high.
So here's the
25%.
question.
Who knows? People believe in a lot of weird stuff.
Right?
Look, just throwing this out there, not to be racist or anything, but this is the first thing that comes to mind. What percentage do we know of the American population is African American? Isn't it
13%.
on the smaller end?
It's like 13.7%, I believe, the last time I looked at it. I look at it frequently.
So people think that there's more gay people than black people? I just curious that I go out and I see plenty of black people. I see plenty of Asian people. I see plenty of multiple races that are very small percentage, 13% or less, and yet people think there's twice as many gay people as any other ethnic race you would see around. That's a little crazy to me.
Well, you don't know for sure. There could have been somebody who answered 125% too, for all we know.
Good point. Good point. Everybody's
Yeah, I guess it didn't really clarify, the article didn't really clarify how they came up with that number, if it was more of a mean, which or an average, or how they came up with that, and there's differences in those terms.
3 or 4% for homosexual, is that right?
Yes. So I guess the latest study that I could find said 3.8%, but there's error in those studies, so it's probably somewhere between 3 and 4%.
When I was a kid, I remember learning about this in health class or something, and I remember them saying 10% of the people of the population was homosexual, and I just did not believe it at the time.
Yeah,
but I mean,
that just sounds like a lot,
I was somebody who didn't even learn that homosexual people existed until I was like 14. So it's pretty sheltered.
Yeah, that kind of topic, talking about gays, lesbians, and stuff like that. Back in my home country, when I was growing up, when you had a conversation about those kind of things, it was always very negative. And I certainly knew that those people existed. Maybe, around 15, 16, I kind of started to finding out about that. But it wasn't until I moved to the U.S. that I was a little more exposed to, variety of people views and things like that, my views also changed, as I was exposed to those kind of things.
Christopher, do you know of any studies in different species besides us of variation in sexual attraction? That's pretty obscure.
Yeah, no, I've actually gone to a lecture or two on the topic, just looking at homosexuality in the animal kingdom, and it's always astounding to me when I experience things like I did at the Pride March, to where it's clear that nobody else seems to know about this, that homosexuality is a normal, natural thing, so to speak, that definitely happens in many other animals, much less mentally sophisticated than us. So
that's interesting. Are we ready to transition to the Pride Fest? Because I'd be interested in hearing that story.
Yeah.
Tell me, so you had an interesting experience at the Pride Fest. I think both Christopher and Uriah, I heard a little bit about it, but I'd love to get the full scale story.
I'd have to get a little hoarse, because these people who were very hateful, and then there was the people who were participating in Pride that were very self-defensive. There was a lot of yelling, a lot of coughing, and it was funny just how riled up people get over something like this, when in reality this shouldn't be that big of an issue. I mean, I think as a country, as humanity, we have better and bigger fish to fry.
Yeah. So this was at the Pride Fest parade, correct?
Yeah. And normally Pride marches take place in June, and that stems back from the Stonewall Inn riots that happened in the 70s. Pretty much what that was going on is it was a neighborhood bar that a lot of people in the LGBT community went to because they felt a little bit safer, but obviously during that time it was still being lesbian and being a homosexual, anything like that was looked down upon, was not tolerated in a lot of places. So police would continuously raid this bar over and over and over again, and got to a point where people got sick of it and they fought back, and they ended up quote unquote winning. I mean, nobody really wins in this situation, but the raids stopped, and that was considered a really big turn in, you know, the LGBT history. So again, that's why normally, because that took place on June 28th, those riots, and so normally prides are in June, and Fort Wayne kind of got spit on a little bit through social media that we can't do anything right because we did it in July, not June. When the reality is, Fort Wayne has a lot of stuff going on in Headwaters Park in June. Yeah. So that's why we just always do it after Three Rivers Festival. It's just where it always is because it's convenient.
Yeah. Let me ask you something real quick. So with the raids of that bar, why were they raiding that bar? Like, what was the cover story, I guess, for the raids?
I'm not exactly sure what the specific cover story was, but I'm not sure if they were trying to pull a bogus law that homosexuality was actually illegal, or if they were just using it as a form of discrimination, just raiding them to look for any excuse that they're breaking the law, whether it might be permits or, you know, alcohol selling to people who are underage. I think they were just going in, making raids to look for anything just because they were homosexuals.
Well,
again,
likely.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Big discrimination is really what it was, and they just got sick of it because it just kept happening over and over again without justification.
It's interesting how we can do that, how we can have certain groups of people that almost are beyond the protection of the law. Like, everybody so many people frown upon the behavior or the association that nobody gives them a fair shot.
Yeah.
I mean, this was in the 70s, right, when this happened?
Yep.
And that was like the beginning of a lot of the homosexual rights and like Pride Fest and that sort of stuff. Probably very different than what we know today.
Well, it's crazy because if we go way back into history, nobody cared about being homosexual or being a lesbian or anything like that. If you go back to early Greek history with Plato and Socrates, everyone thinks Plato's so great. Everyone quotes Socrates. These are great thinkers, and yet Plato thought the love between two men was the highest form of love, and if you put a woman involved, that was just lusting, and that wasn't true love. And yet Socrates, who lived at the same time, which commonly debated Plato, he said, no, that's not quite right. Love is love. He was more just everybody get along. So Socrates was technically the first hippie. But with the hemp and all of that, it kind of makes sense. But no, it's interesting. If you go back into where exactly homosexuality became a problem, it wasn't any issue in early Greek history. It wasn't an issue early Roman history. But the second that Rome started to become controlled by Christianity, it was the Christian emperors that first made homosexuality illegal and punishable by death. And that's when different countries, Spain and England and all of that, who were governed mostly by their religion, whatever that country was, that's when homosexuality got really, really targeted. And that's when laws were passed. And it was really unfounded because before that, nobody cared. It wasn't an issue. And thankfully, as people reformed and as, you know, society reformed a little bit, because we have such a religious stamp on our entire culture, which is unfortunate, but it has skewed the minds of what society thinks is right and what is wrong. And it's really nice because there are these great thinkers who will always come out of such religious constraints to help bring light to what real humanity is. And some of those thinkers were Hirschfeld and Sigmund Freud. Everybody knows who Freud is. And a lot of people thought he was kind of crazy, but he was actually a legit psychologist. He was very smart, very intelligent, and him and Hirschfeld founded the first Sexual Science Institute in Germany. And that was like the largest library for research on the LGBT community, and just massive, brilliant. And Germany was actually more tolerant as opposed to England at the time, who they were not very friendly towards them. They were persecuting writers like Oscar Wilde. They didn't like him and a couple other people. So we had an institute that was slowly but surely spreading the tolerance back, and studies showing that there's nothing wrong with being gay or lesbian, that it's not a mental issue, it's not an illness, and all of this research were proving that. Well, then Hitler came to rise, and they burned it to the ground, and all the research and books with it, along with a lot of other science and research that could have helped the progress of society and our whole culture. It was unfortunate.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, since we're kind of on that topic, I was going to throw in the name of Alan Turing. You guys have probably heard of him. And, I mean, this is straight off of Wikipedia. So he was born in 1912 and died in 1954. And he was a gay man. You know, he was a very smart person, computer scientist, mathematician. You know, he kind of had his hands into basically inventing cryptology, which is how we, you know, protect data, basically.
He turned the tide of the war.
Yeah.
Or he helped turn the tide of the war by decrypting the Enigma device that the Germans were using.
Exactly.
There's a great movie on him.
Yeah. Imitation Game.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
So, you know, he lived in the UK, and in 1952, according to Wikipedia, he was prosecuted for homosexual acts. And instead of, as an alternative to going to jail, he accepted chemical castration.
Oh, damn.
Yes.
That's insane.
Yes. That's in 1952. That is not that far back.
No, it's not at all. That's amazing, Uriah. So the I never thought about this before, but what you were talking about, the implication that almost all of the homosexual fear-mongering, all of it has primarily Christian religious roots, Old Testament roots, Christian, New Testament, and then obviously the Old Testament is part of the Quran. So it's influenced a huge portion of the world. Do you know if there's any kind of prejudice against it, like in some of the other major religions, like Hinduism or?
I haven't looked into Hinduism, but I do know that every, how would you put it, Christian-based or biblical-based religion all have the same deal, whether, you know, you're slipping into Mormonism or Christianity just over. There's so many stinking denominations under Christianity. They're all similar and yet different in their own way, but they all do not support homosexuality. Catholicism doesn't. I know Islam doesn't, but I'm not so sure about Hindu, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
I would imagine that they don't support it, but I'm not sure.
Either way, that's a pretty bad rap to have, you know, just to be born that way or whatever, and then you just
to be
damn, that's horrible.
Yeah, just to be on the fair side, I will throw one thing from the PFLAG meeting that was mentioned. There are indeed some gay-friendly churches out there.
Oh yeah,
that don't necessarily condemn the behavior or any of that, but they aren't many. I think the guy said there was only. I mean, it was a few. It was a handful basically around town that were accepting. Of course, the UU Church is one of them. You know, we were in their building, but they're not an Abrahamic religion or anything like that. They're borderline atheists. They have some kind of spirituality there, but you know, it's not really the hardcore religion like all the Abrahamic faiths.
No, it was really great because at Pride Fest there was a couple organizations there representing, you know, as under their name and banner, FreeThought was there, but the Plymouth Congregational Church, don't quote me on the exact title, but I know Plymouth was on there. They were a church that, you know, very straight up Christianity, but they just waved their flag and said, "We love you and we accept you," and they marched in the parade with them, and it was really interesting having on one side of the street, you had religious people who were screaming very hateful messages, and on the other side, there was another religious group right there who was in support. And not once, I have to admit, not once did the religious people who were participating in Pride shout anything about not being real Christians to them. They didn't say that. I know that they said, "We'll pray for you. This isn't right," but they didn't once say that you are not real or who you say you are. But the people who were on the hateful side of religion, were constantly shouting to anyone who had any religious association with Plymouth. Or there was also a man, I think he was a father, at least he was dressed in the outfit, priest of the father, saying, God loves you, you're fine, there's nothing wrong with you. But this religious hate group is what I call them, because that's the only thing I can think of to properly label them. But they kept shouting, you're a liar, you're not a Christian, you don't believe in God, heresy, using some pretty biblical words too. It was kind of amusing to me. I mean, if you want to go all Old Testament, hellfire and damnation, then there's a way to do it without sounding like you have a big full beard and a top hat on. But they went full out, biblical language and everything.
I grew up that way. I grew up that way. So if you have any questions about like what type of mind is capable of doing that, I could probably give you some answers that they probably won't be very satisfying. But I remember being adamantly hating gay people, thinking that they were like pretty much the scum of the earth and totally possessed by the devil, and they would be the downfall of civilization. I mean, I believed it all. And
so I guess what's it like because what I couldn't fathom from these people were three things. Number one, I couldn't fathom how they believed in loving one another, following Christ, and Christ loves everyone. He, wants everyone to do good. They want to be the best that they can be, that, being antagonistic and hateful isn't the right way. And then two, hating so many things about this world with such a passion that it almost contradicts the idea of being loving and forgiving and supporting. And what was my third point? My third point is to be so close-minded to the outside world. Wow. Because these people, they give me the impression that they choose to live a very sheltered life, not only for their kids, but even in their own. I feel like they live in their own little community with giant walls, and they would just shut their ears and refuse to listen to the world. So with those 3 points between you're taught to love, but you're taught to hate, and you're taught not to listen to anybody. What's it like trying to shove all that in your brain?
Well, you have these justifications that preys upon your animal nature, is what I would call it. But like to address your first point, or your third point, I think, you believe that it's a spiritual fight. Now, don't ask me to define that. I could never get an answer when I started asking the question, what is spirit? Well, it's this intangible thing that you can't feel, taste, touch, smell, all your 5 senses. So it's all got to come from, everything has got to come from the Spirit. And the Bible is that revelation, and then also God works through you. But nevertheless, there's also evil spirits, devil spirits. This is the way that we were taught. And those devil spirits were the things that we were fighting against. So they would say, you love the people, but you hate their actions because they're devil spirit influenced or people are possessed. So you would build walls basically around your mind and your community because you were keeping out those devilish influences. I mean, it's similar to kind of like, the Amish. They want to live their life the way they want to and not be a part of the rest of civilization because they don't want to be corrupted by it or something like that. Don't quote me on that. But it's very similar to that. So any attempt to break you away from this fortress of solitude that you've built around you is terrifying. So you just have all these justifications for keeping it. You're better than everybody else. You think you have all the answers that nobody else has. And any attempt to break that knowledge is an attempt on your faith. It's an attempt on spirit and, whatever the heck that is. I mean, there's so many vagaries. You just get totally lost in it. It's
and if you look to study the history of religion in general, you start noticing this kind of tendency towards new religions. When they pop up, they're really trying to make that claim that they are better, that they're able to do it much better than everyone else. And so they go on to establish their own little fraternity, so to speak, to prove that they're better than everyone else. And so they have to put up those walls to make themselves different and better.
Dude, the Church of Cannabis brings the walls down. I like that church. It's New Age.
Well, let me try this in there. Back in my home country, I moved here when I was 18. There was definitely a lot of homophobia. I used to listen to these local hip hop bands, and they talked about how they were going to beat up the gays. And one of the songs talked about how they beat up this group of transgender people and all this stuff. You know, the transgender woman tricked the guy and then he found out and he beat her up. You know, those kind of things. You know, I used to listen to that kind of stuff, and people around me talked about that. And, you know, I didn't know any better. So I took the side of the hateful side for years. You know, and it wasn't until actually, as I mentioned earlier, I moved here to the U.S. and I started working. And a couple of years later, I found out that 2 or 3 of the guys I was working with were all gay. And I just couldn't believe it at first. Like, I literally had a shouting match with my sister in the car as she was trying to explain to me that those couple guys are not straight and that they are gay. And I just refused to accept that. And, you know, it was just the evidence was pointing to all my prior beliefs that I felt so secure in being totally wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I was wrong. Those people, I had no reason to be afraid. I mean, part of it was, you know, the rhetoric that I had heard, you know, maybe when I was 15, was that you have to be afraid of those people because they were like pedophiles. You know, they were there to, they wanted to rape little boys and stuff like that. And none of that was true. You know, I had been at parties with those people. I had gotten drunk around them. And, you know, they never tried to take advantage of me. And they wouldn't, you know, I mean, there's nothing to that. Like, that's a complete myth. And, you know, gay people aren't trying to rape anyone. You know, they just want to love whoever they want to love. And at the end of the day, it should be their right to do so. But, you know, I feel like with a lot of kids, when they grow up around hearing all that, you know, it's very difficult to break those views. You know, the stuff that you're raised with. It's not easy. It's not easy to break those beliefs.
Oh no.
My situation was a little different. Ever since second grade, I've realized that everyone around me is a freaking moron.
See, I want to join you in that club, Christopher, but that means I'm a total moron too, and that makes sense, I guess. I don't trust anything I'm saying.
But yeah, so I've been skeptical. I've been skeptical for a long time. Yeah.
That's hilarious. I like.
I don't even know where to begin with that.
You should start a church yourself, Christopher.
What would we call it? Because if we brought any sort of snake handling, they would just throw it up in an uproar, hands in the air, and walk away.
You could call yourself.
They tried that.
The non-moronites.
There you go.
What I found it interesting is that all these religious people, one of the main things they were chanting is, actually they had the whole group, they were chanting, "Homosex is hell." And the response, this was after the Pride Walk, I should loop back here. So when we got there, we were waiting to start the march, and one side, you had a bunch of protesters, the other side, they were chanting back, and we were waiting to start the march, and one guy from the religious group came over, and it's one thing just to have your video camera and walk around and to very friendly talk to people, but he was very antagonistic, and he was clearly causing a disturbance.
Yeah,
saying
awesome. Things
like, "What you're doing is wrong. You are wrong. You're going to hell. This is sinful. You are evil." It's one way if you spin the rhetoric as this is a sin, this action is a sin, but no, these people were very clearly saying you are, not this is, you are. They were targeting the people and defining them as a whole person as evil and wrong.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's one way to where I can have don't hate the person, hate the sin. That's one thing, but that's not the rhetoric they were spreading. Yeah. So it got to a point where, tensions really started to rise, and an officer came over and asked him to go to the other side. Well, this guy tried to play a legal card, saying, "This is public. I have a right to be here." And the guy's like, "Look, I don't want to arrest you. I don't want to do anything like that." And he jumped on the word arrest. This religious protester said, "I don't want to be arrested. I don't want to be arrested, but if I'm not going to move it, because if you do arrest me, that's a violation of my civil rights and blah, blah, blah. When the reality is an officer has every right. And he goes, look, if the committee people of this whole Pride March want me to, I will arrest you. So he went and he brought them in and says, look, how do you want me to handle this? They had a nice long conversation where the guy was trying to say that it was a public sidewalk, he had a right to be there. And he threatened. He actually made a threat. Said, if you arrest me and if you tell this officer to arrest me, you are liable for this arrest. Your name will be on it and his name will be on it. Pretty much saying that if they arrested him, he would file a lawsuit and target these people. So
did they get arrested? Did they arrest him?
No, he did. I didn't hear the agreement, but I did hear him walk away. All right, we'll go over there. I'll go over here as per what we agreed. Because reality is, the officer doesn't have to arrest him, but he can certainly detain him for however long he likes.
Right.
You know, I love it when people try and go up to an officer and try and tell him what he can and cannot do, like they know the law better than him.
Well, you know that guy who went out there with the camera, he's going to go back to his little posse, his church or whatever, and everybody's going to be like, man, God must have been really working in you, man. Good job. You really stood up for the word of God. And
which is why I was hoping they wouldn't arrest him. I didn't want him to become a martyr.
Yeah.
I really didn't want that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Either way, he gained some esteem in his little church because of that.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. And honestly, it was kind of my fault. I was actually the one who went up to him.
Yeah, let's hear this
right
story.
before the cops got up to him.
So you're the reason
started
he was
it.
so antagonistic.
Because he tried to play this card as if Christians are all this peaceful stuff and they've only ever been peaceful, and Islamic people are just going around and killing people in record numbers because their religion is hostile. And I'm like, well, hold on, Tex. Let's not forget the Crusades.
Hold on, Tex. Was that his name?
No. I just randomly.
That's what he likes to say.
Yeah.
Tex or Cochise.
Yeah.
Okay, Tex. Sorry, go on.
But anyway, yeah. So we started a discussion about the Crusades, and I was trying to get him to the point where he was going to actually admit responsibility, and he kind of started to. He's like, "Well, yeah, those people kind of did things, but they weren't true Christians." I'm like, "Okay."
Oh, come on.
And that became, a nice big fuel later on.
Yeah. So
true Christians.
So that's right when the cop came in between us to separate us and started talking to the guy to get him to go across the street.
Yeah.
It was just getting interesting.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, so then the Pride March happened. It was great. I estimated it was about 2-mile march through the city.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we basically, we went downtown around to where the farmers market. We went up, I think it was Berry Street. Yep. We went up Berry Street past the Citizen Square, and then we came down Calhoun to the bridge, walked up one side of the bridge, came back down the other, and we're back at Headwaters Park. So good 2-mile walk. Got a lot of people honking their horns when we were on the bridge. You had a lot of people waving flags out their car window because they know the march is going on at that time. So it was a lot of fun, but it seemed that there was a trail of the religious people who finally at that point could be on the same side of the sidewalk as us. They were not limited to the other side. So when we got towards the end of the march back to Headwaters, they were there waiting, and they were just separated by a sidewalk instead of the road.
Nice.
And that's when we started hearing some really surprising, very hateful, it's insane. I never thought I would hear things like this out of somebody's mouth who claimed to be religious at all. I mean, I've heard some pretty dumb stuff.
Can you say some of it?
Nothing like this.
Can you repeat some of it on radio, or is it?
Oh yeah,
radio?
This is
great. Let's hear it. Come on,
that's even the best thing. So we get down there, and that's when we hear the chanting, and that's when the religious side was, starting to shout, "Homosex is hell, homosex is hell," and then the LGBT community responded in a very large chant because there was only about 10 total religious protesters from both groups.
Sure.
Yeah, there was about 10 people, and then against, a crowd of, hundreds. Kind of funny, but so
did they bring any loudspeakers or anything?
Yes, at first, before the march began, the religious people had a loudspeaker, and they were made to turn it down because it was disruptive, and I think they tried to pull the, decimal law that I have to be so loud.
That's
so
okay.
decibels. Thank decibel loss. So they had to turn that off, and so they came over and they didn't have the mega horn, whatever thing anymore. So we got there and we came back. They were shouting "homosex is hell." LGBT started shouting "God is love, God is love, God is love," and then there was another girl coming up. She was trying to just pull the whole, "Are you serious? Are you serious? What is your problem? I'm a good person." You know, just typical. She was a little bit nonsensical, just very self-defensive. And, you know, he came back and just started shouting, "Shame on you." And so one side started shouting and pointing fingers, "Shame on you, shame on you." And then, well, that didn't sit well with the Pride people, because then that entire crowd just started looking at them saying, "No, shame on you."
Right.
So then at that point, they quit the chanting war, because the chanting got really annoying. Thank God it quit chanting.
How long did it go on?
The chanting war probably went on for a good 10 minutes.
Wow.
Just nothing but just chanting. So it was cool and kind of funny to, I don't know. It's just amusing having them think up their own slogans to kind of throw at each other. It was just funny.
Oh.
But
I wonder how much those protesters prepare for those ahead of time.
Oh,
did they come up with like slogans ahead of time, or?
I'm pretty sure they've got signs posted with big picket signs, and there's one guy who was sitting there like prostrate with his hands in the air, holding on to this double sign on a stick. It was pretty crazy. And the second group we've seen before. We saw them at the Coliseum when we were there for a Magic Mike show for funsies. It was what was it, 21st birthday, late 21st birthday for my sister-in-law, so we were just doing it as a gag for her. But the Comets were also playing, and they were there protesting that show and the Comets game, so I thought that was a little silly, but
Is this
they look for events like this, and they are prepared.
So this is the same group that does that?
Yeah, there were two groups there. One group we hadn't seen before, and the other group was protesters we've seen before.
There was some people that were protesting at the Trump rally in Fort Wayne. I wonder if it's those same people. They had like a small loudspeaker, and they had the signs that you were going to burn in hell and all that.
It probably was them, because the people with they've got a mega horn that they sit there and they use it a lot. I've seen them use it.
Yeah, they were the more radical group that was very, very aggressive and very personal in their comments. The other group that I interacted with from before, they're much more passive. I definitely have a little bit more respect for them from them. So
yeah. So after this chanting war was over, that's when we started getting into some real personal stuff and this is mostly from the aggressive group that we saw. And so it started out as I heard some guy talking to him. "Oh yeah, that's them."
Oh yeah, we just got a picture that was sent to us. That is absolutely 100% them.
Yep, that's
the second group, the non-radical group.
Yep, same signs, same people. So
yeah,
but
that was taken outside of Fullinger Theater. I think that was the when they were there for Ringo Starr, protesting Ringo Starr for some reason.
Why? It's Ringo.
Exactly.
Ringo Starr? Really?
Yeah.
I love the things that we get into. It's hilarious.
And then they were also there for Alice Cooper, which I could sort of understand. But Alice Cooper's a pretty hardcore Christian, though.
They were protesting Ringo Starr, but they were there for the Alice Cooper show.
Yeah, they were there for Alice Cooper. I've been to 4 concerts there this year. They were there for Alice Cooper. They weren't there for the Monkees. They were there for Ringo Starr, and they weren't there for Weird Al.
I think Weird Al would have had a field day with them.
Monkees.
Yeah, that's the same group that was at the Coliseum for the Trump rally. That is the same group. Yep. I recognize
they do this a lot.
The guy with the beard. Yeah.
Yep. And the younger kid who is directly to his, if you're looking from his direction, directly to his right, our left, he is younger kid. I think he's 20 something only, but he's very, very adamant, and he's following right in whoever that person is to him, his footsteps. So
they look like fairly young kids surrounding the guy.
Yeah, kind of interesting, isn't it? Bring your kid to protest day.
Yeah, I wouldn't really put them at more than like 18, 20 tops, any of them.
Yeah, well, at the Pride, there was a kid who must have been like 8 years old there.
Yeah.
Holding a sign, sweating his head off.
Yeah.
8 years old. It was just crazy. But to get into some of the things that these religious hate groups say is, I first overheard some guy, he said that it came to light that this guy was Muslim, and this guy had the audacity to start attacking him and saying that he was responsible for Orlando. Not a Muslim was responsible, saying that you are responsible for Orlando. And then he went on to say that today's homo is tomorrow's mass murderer.
Yeah, well, I used to believe that.
Oh, I heard about that, yeah.
He actually shouted that. That was insane. And, another instance that I got was a girl was walking along and he started talking to this girl and saying that, what's wrong with you? And, you weren't raised right. And then he brought in her dad and she said, my dad did a great job. I'm a good person. And he said, no, your dad didn't do a good job. He did a terrible job. And she goes, I live with my dad. And he said, well, what kind of drugs is he on?
Right.
Oh, wow.
Instantly. Wow. Just what kind of drugs is he on? She goes, he's not. What are you talking about? He goes, if your dad had any sense at all, he would take you home and he would whip your butt.
Wow.
Spare the rod. And
yeah,
bad consequence. I can't remember the verses anymore.
And then they were calling other people, you're evil, you're going to burn in hell. And there was this younger girl. She must have been like 18 or 19. If she was in her early 20s, she was a very small, petite girl. And she was bawling. She just started crying and sobbing and trying to walk away. It was really sad because I don't think that she had ever encountered such hate or and antagonism before.
Wow.
Just for being part of something like that. Yeah, she was crying so hard that one of the committee leaders came out and gave her a big hug, and there were two other people who started giving her a hug. I'm looking at that, I'm like, really? It was just insane. That was just the tip of the iceberg, just from what I was able to overhear amidst all the loud yelling and, scripture. And it cracks me up because Wayne TV did a story on this, obviously, and the video shows them just shouting scripture and not being antagonistic. And I was reading some of the comments on their Facebook page and how these people were saying they weren't doing anything wrong. They were just yelling scripture. That's what people do at protests. They yell. And I made these comments like, no, they were targeting people personally. I was there the whole time. This video is misleading on both sides. And nobody cared to respond to my first-hand account of what really happened. And this is what really kills me, is that these people who are in Fort Wayne, who weren't there to protest as a religious group, but they're just people who live in Fort Wayne who believe these things. And I saw comments of, this is a religious issue. I saw comments of, well, you better hose down Headwaters Park afterwards. You don't want everyone getting AIDS. And the guy was serious. Somebody said, I hope you're joking because people might think you're a troll. He goes, no, I'm serious.
See, this is why it's so important to have the Pride Fest and groups like PFLAG. Pride to me is kind of the visible wing of this movement. They're out there, people see them, and PFLAG is kind of all about education and advancing equality and teaching people that we aren't just men and women and straight and some other god awful categories. There's a continual spectrum of sexual orientation, gender identity, and I'm so glad that all these medical societies no longer consider being gay or being transgender to be like a mental disease, which I believe that used to be considered that in the past.
Yeah.
So
I think it was in 1973 that actually got officially removed from the mental illness.
Good.
But there are still people out there, social workers and psychologists who believe that it's a mental illness. And, I love my mother to death, but she's religious. And I know personally that she doesn't support the LGBT group. Now, she would never, ever be so rude and disrespectful to be any hateful at all to anybody like that. So she's actually, a decent person, but that's her belief, and I'm disappointed personally, but I'm not going to sit here and say she's a terrible person for feeling that way. That's all I can do is just, I don't approve of that belief, but is who she is. There's nothing I can do to change it. As much as I would like to, I can't. And I've accepted that, and she's accepted my stance on it. But she does believe that homosexuality and lesbianism is a mental illness. And if I show her any study that says, no, back in it was 70s, that a psychiatrist actually published a paper, peer-reviewed the whole schlabotnik, that gay men are just as well adjusted, if not more so, than heterosexual men. And there's no reason to think that there's a problem with their lifestyle. There's no problem mentally there. That's one of the big reasons that got taken off in 73 of the actual mental illness list. So it's just ridiculous. And it really kills me because some other things that I heard through the, I'll call it the Pride Vine. What I saw is, again, people were saying this is a religious issue when it's not. And people were saying, I don't see the point of Pride. All it does is parade sick behavior to our children. That was another thing I read. And then somebody said, why can't we just keep what happens in the bedroom in the bedroom? Why do we have to, put it out there? It's not right. And one of the biggest things I would say to our community now is that it's only just recently, I think it was only just last year, that all 50 states, you're allowed to marry whoever you want. Just last year, that's it. That's ridiculous that they have had to fight so long just for marriage equality. And that's great. That's awesome. But the fight isn't over yet, because immediately following that, there have been multiple laws that have been attempted to be passed that it's about religious protection, right, freedom of religion, and that's great. I'm all for that. It's always going to be around. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't directly discriminate against the LGBT, but if you read it, there's giant loopholes that would allow that and protect anybody who would try and not serve somebody who is gay or is a lesbian. And that's what really irritates me. And whenever that comes to the floor, people say, hey, can we just have an amendment? Anything that would say, hey, if I'm a bakery and I make wedding cakes, I'm not going to make wedding cakes for an LGBTQ wedding. Have a sign up there to say that. No, they thought that was ridiculous. Well, duh, because it's discrimination. But that law would allow you technically to not do that. And that's what the fight is now. It's not a religious issue. It's a civil rights and equality issue. And people just don't seem to get that.
No, they don't
They
get
think
it. They'll never
about
get
the
it.
bedroom. It's not.
As long as they believe in what the Bible says, they will think of gay people like murderers. We don't have "will not serve murderers" sign on your bakery or something like that. It's against the law. They think it's that quality of an action. So
But didn't Jesus dine with thieves and tax collectors and prostitutes and the people
reason
that...
has nothing to do with it. Reason has
Okay.
absolutely nothing to do with it. I mean,
See, I had a discussion on Facebook with someone, concerning gay rights and things like that. And one of the points I tried to make was, your holy book tells you not to judge people or you will be judged. And they were having none of it, So they're picking and choosing, and it's not just the RFRA laws, just to kind of go back to that. It's also all the bathroom laws. One thing that we talked about at the PFLAG meeting was how important are those bathroom bills, for transgender people. Those people may be blocked from, using public restrooms, period, almost, because they don't feel comfortable looking as a woman to go into a men's room, and they're forbidden from going into a woman's restroom. So where are they supposed to go? These are important human rights, issues, and it starts with bathrooms, but tomorrow it's going to be something else. It's going to be showers at the locker. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. At the gym or all that. And
It'll be
Oh.
sports teams, you know?
Oh, sure. Yeah. All of
And
it.
they're so afraid that when it comes to these bathroom laws, they're afraid that some guy's going to pretend to dress like a woman so he can go peep on your daughter. Well, what about a coach who is a soccer coach for an all-girls team? We don't see anything wrong with that, but if you follow the same logic, there should be a problem. You want one guy to be hanging out with all these little girls, why would he want to do that? Oh, because he loves soccer. You accept that because that's the logic you have to follow, but I mean, you can't say, well, we need to protect our girls from somebody. You know, he's a male coach, but you know, there needs to be some protection. So let's not make guys be allowed to be coaches of all girls teams. It should be just women. You can't do that. That's discrimination. It's the same thing when it comes to bathrooms, and it's not just an issue of, well, they're uncomfortable, they want to use the bathroom they identify with. No, it's a lot of times fear, because it starts when they're younger. These kids who are transgender will go into a bathroom and they look like a girl, but they have to use the boys' bathroom because that's just the law right now. And they get beaten up badly.
Oh, yeah.
And it's terrible because kids are cruel. But it's not just a comfort issue. I mean, it is, but it stems from real fear of going into a place and not sure if you're going to get harassed, not sure if you're going to get public place, even if you don't get beaten up, you might get a shove or something might happen. It's uncomfortable because it's scary. It's not uncomfortable because, oh, it's not the bathroom I identify with. It's uncomfortable due to fear, and that's a problem because it's not just adults that are suffering. It's kids, 14-year-olds, 12-year-olds.
Yeah. So one thing that was brought up at the PFLAG meeting was this school, and I don't remember what state it was, but it was a high school, and they must have had, you know, a transgender kid in there, maybe more than one, and it's startling. They don't see what the problem is with the action they took, but they decided that they decided that they were going to allow transgender kids to use the bathrooms of the sex that they identify with. So if you identify as a girl, use the girls' room. But they had to wear like little yellow bracelets. And it's like, oh, come on. That is so like Hitler 1939 with the Jewish stars.
Exactly. They're going to wear a little star patch.
Yeah, come on. Now we're going to label them and we're going to make them walk around with that. I mean, if they weren't getting beat up before, just wait and see what happens.
Right.
And they meant well. Like that's the thing, you know. That's one case where they probably meant well. And they just got it so wrong.
Yeah, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
I will say, though, that, you know, in light of your story of, you know, the protesters at Pride Fest, like 10 people, like that's minuscule compared to what it once was. I mean, I imagine in a few years people won't even take the time anymore to go down there and protest it.
You know, that's why, honestly, I didn't even think about it until I got there and saw them. I honestly thought we were past this.
No.
Yeah. Well, we are. I mean, we are moving like at a monumental pace.
Oh, no, guys, we're so not past this. When the Republican primary was still going on, there was this gathering of people that several of the Republican candidates spoke after a guy named Kevin Swanson that argued for the killing of gay people. And he said that he wasn't ashamed to hold that view because, you know, those were God's words, not his words, that we should kill the gays.
That is all the time we have for you this week. This has been the Hoosier Humanist Hour. Be sure to check out FreeThought Fort Wayne on Facebook and on Meetup.com. Thank you for listening. We hope your days are filled with logic, reasoning, and the eternal quest for knowledge.